go that long. So I kind of have a hard stop at 11:30 just to get situated in the chamber for the 12 o'clock.
And since, go on.
I was going to say, let's play it a little bit by ear as we get closer to the 11:30 mark, John, because we could push back closed session just a little bit, or excuse me, open session just a little bit.
Okay.
I'm getting past the cold, so I'm going to spare you guys the opportunity to get infected and participate from here. So,
well, take care of yourself.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
I'm totally fine. It's just we've all become more aware of not sharing the love.
Well, on that note, it is 10 o'clock, so let's go ahead and call our meeting to order. Let's call the roll.
Good morning, Mayor Rogers.
Here.
Member Fleming. Oh,
here.
Member Sawyer.
Here.
Let the record reflect that all members of the subcommittee are present.
All right, thank you. Glad we have a full boat today, and I see our staff has joined us as well, so thank you. We'll start today with our public comments for non-agenda items. For folks who are interested, you'll have 3 minutes to talk about something that falls within the jurisdiction of the Economic Development Subcommittee, but is not on today's agenda, should you so choose. And I'm not seeing any hands. So let's jump right in with item 3.1.
Okay, just one moment while I go ahead and pull up that presentation.
And I'll just get started talking at you a little bit while she brings that up. So good morning. I just want to say it's good to be back on this topic after we started in March. And just to give you a little preview, in addition to myself, we have a slate of staff members who are available to answer questions for you on project labor agreements, including beyond myself, we have Assistant City Manager Jason Nutt, Mike Prince from Public Works, I believe Lori Urbanik is on, as well as potentially Jennifer Burke, and then Jessica Mullen from the City Attorney's Office, and we added Socorro Shields to the discussion as well to talk about or to overlay DEI considerations on PLAs. And while Eileen is getting the presentation up, I do want to remind you we have 2 weighty issues today. In addition to project labor agreements, we have the short-term rental thing. So we're going to try to get through this and just keep in mind that we need to leave enough time for them at the back end as well. All right, next slide. Okay, so to start us off today, we're just going to give you a reminder of what the key policy considerations we discussed previously that brought us to today. Specifically, or I should say it's specific to city projects. What we have been considering since March based on your feedback is whether the use of project labor agreements is the best tool to develop and maintain a skilled local labor pool, whether PLAs can deliver capital projects in accordance with specifications on time and within adopted budgets and contingencies, and then also do they expand opportunities across demographic barriers while also being locally consistent with our environmental goals. Next slide. So our end goal for today's meeting is to get the okay from you to take the feedback you give us and put it into a report so we can present at a study session, have a discussion with the full council at a study session sometime in July. I think we have held July 12th as our goal date. But to get there, we're going to go through the points that are outlined on this slide. So you can, be informed by the information we've gathered thus far. We've met with a number of current contractors as well as labor we want to give you some, the background, PLA background information that we've researched. And then obviously we want to get to the key policy considerations for feedback, which include definitions, project types, that type of thing. Next slide. So again, as a reminder, on March 8th, the feedback, the key takeaways we took from the March 8th meeting was that you are looking to align contract assignments with the climate action plan. The goal, obviously, with if we focus on local workforce, it reduces carbon footprint, less travel requirements, et cetera. Key to that is enhancing the local workforce, so ensuring quality apprenticeship opportunities and support of increasing the diversity in the trades workforce. And then lastly, the main thing that we heard from March was to enhance local preferences as best we can within state laws and regulations, but specific to this, really increasing local employee compensation, encouraging local spending, and it's the multipliers of having a well-paid, robust local workforce and being that local employment center. Next slide. So we're going to get into some of the data that we found. So Jason and I met with the North Bay Trades Council, and we had a great discussion with them, sharing with them, sort of the takeaways from March 8th, some of what we heard and understand to be your interests in PLAs. And we also asked them, because in the with our current contractors in public works and water, we did a lot of research. We're trying to ask labor the same questions that we're asking of our current contractors. So we didn't get exactly the same information, but what information we got is here. We do know that there is an interest from the North Bay Trades Council expressed an interest on behalf of all 18 Northern California organizations that they want to be involved in the PLA. And so when we started talking about what's local or not local and how hiring practices work, we'll get into that a little bit later on this in the slide deck. But it is good to know to them, sort of what they consider local or what the workforce draw is. So as noted, there are only 4 of the 18 Northern California organizations, only 4 have offices in Sonoma County. And then the rest are mostly south of us. But interestingly, we have a good portion of the membership in the North Bay, over 2,400 of them, 40% of which live in Sonoma, Marin, Napa, Mendocino, Lake counties. And the bulk of those are in Sonoma County. And then of course, 60% live in Solano County. So this is interesting. Again, now just to note it, we're gonna go into, I'm gonna hand it over to Jason Nutt, and we'll get into our other stuff, but we'll talk about what local means on a later slide. Next slide. So Jason, I'm going to hand it to you for this.
Thanks, Raisa. So as she mentioned, as we were talking with the Trades Council and trying to better understand how they exist within Northern California, we also looked at the existing contracts that the city has been using over the last several years. And you'll notice we use the term bidders. And what that means is these are companies that have submitted bids for specific projects that we've issued RFPs for. And what you'll see is 75% of the bids are coming from contractors that exist outside of Sonoma County. About 25% are within Sonoma County. When we look at the staffing and demographic of those contractors that have Sonoma County as their home, we had about 65 companies that responded to our survey. And provided us information about the number of employees, where those employees lived by zip code. 21 contractors responded to the 65 local bidders. And so you'll see about 75% of our local bidding contractors have employees that live in the 5 Northern California counties that Raisa discussed previously. And we'll go into a little more detail in the future with a little over 60% being specifically within Sonoma County. And so that's where our current contract base is coming from. Next slide. Trying to just gain some understanding about what project loads look like. And we'll go through a couple of slides here that get to different angles on how we're trying to look at the scenarios. One is, we know that a majority of the agencies that have project labor agreements typically are establishing a threshold. And as we're all aware, Sonoma County established a $10 million threshold, and they've not had success really in implementing a PLA for projects that meet that threshold. So for our process, we decided to pull a $5 million threshold to see what projects in the next few years are coming up. And you can see that there are 9 projects that we are estimating are going to be above the $5 million threshold. They're very substantial projects. They've got a lot of community recognition, and they're significant for our community coming forward. And so just to give you an example of how that particular level of threshold would look, so that you can see the type of projects coming forward. Next slide, please. How we arrived at 5 million is we started to take all of our data and show it in different ways. And that's what these next 2 slides will do. This tries to demonstrate the percentile of projects based on a certain dollar amount. And what we attempted to utilize was, where do all of these project types merge and meet? What seems to be the point where, depending upon project type, they all coalesce under a certain percentile, and that was about that $5 million range. And so this was an instrumental component for us. But you can also see, as we look at the various project types, over the course of the last 7 years, sort of how they vary as far as the dollar amounts and percentiles.
Hey,
Next.
Jason,
Yes,
before you get too far, Councilmember Sawyer has his hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I was just going to ask, Mayor, is it okay to ask questions in the interim, or do you want us to hold? What is your pleasure?
No, I think go ahead and jump in. I think that there's enough data in this that we don't want to lose threads.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So if we could go back to slide 7. And Jason, could you expand a little bit on that threshold, that $10 million threshold, and why you decided to move it down to 5? I wasn't clear as to how that happened, the process.
So there are a couple of reasons why we looked at something other than conforming with the county's program. One, the county recognized that the $10 million that they established back in 2014 didn't result in actual projects being delivered underneath the policy. That the policy and the threshold just didn't match each other in the reality of implementing. And so we knew that we needed to look at something a little lower within the scale and the range, with the intent of trying to hit large scale projects. And when we get to discuss the definitions of what PLAs were intended for, the term large scale projects tends to be the primary discussion point. And so $5 million is a point where we establish large scale projects exist. It's not the only point and the only threshold we could have decided, but it was one that we felt really established high quality, high value, and high profile large projects within the city of Santa Rosa that could make this process, especially as an interim phase of rolling out a policy, it could give us an idea and an example of how beneficial or not that policy could be. So that's why we made the decision to go beyond and lower than the $10 million that the county had utilized.
So I'm still a little bit confused. So at $10 million, was no one interested in bidding, or they did not feel that a PLA was reasonable at a $10 million level? I'm still not clear as to why you had to lower the threshold.
You know what?
Go ahead.
If I may, I think, I mean, the thing that we're trying to do most intentionally is to give a range of options. And so if we came in only at $10 million, understanding what projects look like that based on the experience we're seeing at the county, we would see basically, you know, the potential of not enough projects that we considered that it would be a reasonable assumption. So what we're trying to do is look at a range of opportunities, and 10 million may not be the correct range based on the feedback we received from, you know, talking with labor, certainly the efforts that we're seeing that they're undertaking right now with the county, as well as some feedback we received from council.
And council member, I will say during our March 8th meeting, members of the subcommittee did mention that 10 million was too high of a threshold for our consideration, and that we needed to look at another point along the scale. And so this is where staff, this is the conclusion that staff came to, at least for this part of the discussion. And that's what the next two slides were, to try to explain why we picked that $5 million. This particular table was to show the value and the type of projects that would be included over the next few years should 5 million be the threshold chosen, assuming we're moving forward with a project labor agreement policy.
And to be clear, staff is not making any recommendations. We are just giving you a range of options and trying to accommodate the data to support the range.
Thank you very much.
Great point, Raisa. Thank you for adding that. And then, so if we go to the next slide. And actually, let's move to the next slide then, since we've talked about that, right?
Jason, before you go on to the next one, if you go back, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your methodology. So what you were saying is that based on the confluence, if I understand correctly, based on the confluence of projects here, the $5 million threshold would capture, is it 10% of the total projects?
It would be under 10%, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. So the next slide, please. And so if we look at that same data set in a different way and just look at the numbers of projects that are produced based on certain dollar amounts, certain bid or estimate amounts, $5 million was about 6 projects over the course of the last 7 years. You'll see that the size and scale of projects that we're anticipating in the next 2 to 3 years is actually more than 6. And we felt that that was a great place, should council move us in that direction, a good place for us to start, to be able to determine if this could be beneficial for us, given the key aspects of what we would expect to see as benefits from a project labor agreement. Next slide. So then we start getting into the terms. And so to some extent, these are areas that we utilize to try to better understand the concept of a PLA, the concept of what we're currently doing for contract labor, to think about where some of the considerations that Raisa and I were just describing between the demographics, between the conditions and key considerations that you outlined for us back in March. And so we then decided we needed to make sure that we clearly understood the definitions of certain components, because if we don't have the definition right, it's going to be very difficult for staff to create something that either the subcommittee or the council during a study session would be able to follow along and concur that we're accomplishing the goals at hand. And so when we think about what does building trade mean, or what does union hall labor mean, or non-union contractor, so those are terms that we'll end up using during the course of our presentations. You may hear similar language being used by members who call in, or folks that you may speak with about project labor agreements along the way. And so, I don't want to read these, but I wanted to at least provide you with an opportunity to provide feedback if you felt we were missing the boat here, or if there was another style of labor or contractor that we need to incorporate a definition of that isn't already shown here. All right, next slide, please. So when we think about what a project labor agreement is, this is the generalized definition that we've been working off of. And it's an agreement between a project owner and a developer that's typically associated with the building trade unions, designed to govern the employer-employee relationship of the general contractor and subcontractors. It is an agreement between the city and the trades, as well as the contractor, to determine who is going to be staffing the construction activities of that particular project. It is more defined, it is more organized than our current contracts. Under our current contract base, we don't require any specific definition of where the labor comes from. They may be union or trade, they may not be. In this particular component of a defined project labor agreement, we are establishing certain rules associated with how a contractor will populate their labor and workforce during the course of delivering that project.
And Jason, I just want to put a pin in something for discussion later. I think given the rules, given the desired outcomes when we talk about workforce development, project labor agreements typically do apply to one specific project. And we're not talking about a specific project. We're talking about an overall climate of how the city utilizes its contracting authority to be able to help develop the workforce that lives here. So perhaps even within the definitions, the referral of a project labor agreement, what we're talking about is very different than what the county did with a one-off project where each of those projects have to come in. So even the name itself, we might want to discuss maybe a community labor agreement or something a little bit different.
And so there are, as you mentioned, Mayor, there are a few different methodologies that are utilized out there. One is a project labor agreement that is specific to a unique project. There are other project labor agreements that result in more master agreements with various trades and unions that are established and set up ahead of time that would then be applied to multiple projects as projects get put into the bidding environment. And so depending upon how we proceed or the type of recommendation that the subcommittee and future council would like us to move forward with, we would look at either one of those two as the primary mechanism for us to establish that relationship between the city and the trades.
And John?
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to drill in a little bit to the fourth bullet that refers to labor disruptions. Is it our experience that, or the county's experience, that when there is a project that is under a PLA, that there are non-union picket lines disrupting projects?
So
let me clarify. So this suggests that if you have a PLA, that it avoids labor disruptions. So that would suggest that there are disruptions, potential disruptions by non-trade, non-union organizations that could potentially disrupt the project.
And that is one of the statements that's been made over the course of the last decade as project labor agreements gain more foothold throughout the country, that on various projects there are labor challenges that occur, and if a unionized agreement between the project owner and the trades is established, you predetermine the mechanism to work through and around those labor disruptions. We in Santa Rosa, to the best of my knowledge, do not have a history of labor problems. That doesn't mean they couldn't occur in the future, but I'm not aware of a project at this point that has seen a labor disruption specifically relating to a dispute either between labor and a contractor that stalled or stopped the project, or between the labor and the agency or the city of Santa Rosa.
So in this case, they are avoiding a problem which we do not at this point have.
We don't have experience with this historically. That doesn't, again, given the number of large-scale projects coming, that doesn't mean that they might not come in the future, but yes, that is the accurate statement. Right now, it is a generally described benefit of a project labor agreement. It does not specifically apply to the city of Santa Rosa at this point in time, given our history.
And I think, and I bring that up because in my experience, and maybe it's because I was not paying attention, most of the picket lines I see are union picket lines. So I don't remember seeing non-union picket lines. That's not necessarily because they don't exist, but I just, when I think of a picket line, I usually think of it being a union picket line, which would be a disruption to the project. So I'm just wondering who this is targeting. I guess that's the question.
And I will say that I would assume that there are members of the Trade Council that are on the call, and when they have the opportunity, they are likely to either correct the statement that I've made if I've misstepped, or provide additional information as to why this particular item could be a benefit for the city moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I look forward to that.
And because I've seen a couple hands pop up and then go away and then pop up, just so folks know, we'll get through the presentation and questions, and then we'll frame what type of feedback we're looking for from the public and from the members, and then we'll go to the public comment to be able to do so.
And I think this is an opportunity for me just to make a statement that the team that's currently working on this for the city, we have not eat and breathe project labor agreements in our career. This is a new program that we're looking at, and as hard as we've attempted to do research to prepare for not just this presentation, but what we expect will be a more in-depth presentation to the full council in July. I don't want to presume that I'm going to speak with more intelligence or more certainty than some of our counterparts out there who have been living this for the last many, many years. So that's why I believe members of the public will likely be talking to you that may provide additional insight to what we as a team will be presenting today. All right, next slide, please. So when we look at, when we tried to reach out to various agencies, and what we did is a couple of things, is we spoke with the League of California Cities. We had the opportunity to get a fairly comprehensive master list, in their opinion, of agencies across the state that have project labor agreement policies in place. A majority of those agencies do project labor agreements on a project-by-project basis. They do not have a blanket project labor agreement policy. We then spent time as staff working on selecting some of those agencies to have further and additional conversations with, predominantly looking at agencies that may look or feel similar to ours, whether it's population, whether it's project type, whether it's in the water's case, agencies that do the turnkey type of operation that we do. And so you can see in here the agencies that we've been able to reach out to, why we chose them based on population, where they're at, and some of the comments that they have about the project labor agreements that they've put in place. Generally speaking, water agencies and districts have not incorporated project labor agreements into their programs. However, there are a few, such as the Santa Clara Valley Water District have incorporated project labor agreements. But in general, water agencies have not. We haven't necessarily received a whole lot of feedback from them, but you can see Contra Costa identified in here that they've used in the past, but they stopped. As far as I'm aware, we have not been told any specifics as to why they stopped in the 90s. but yet we are in the process of continuing to research to understand some of those nuances along the way. You can also see agencies on the right-hand side of the slide that we've reached out to that we haven't received feedback from. It's our intent to continue to try to better understand some of those organizations and policies that they have in place. Again, we're trying to just understand where folks are at, why agencies may or may not be using them, and how they are similar or relate to the city of Santa Rosa. Next slide. So similar to the bullet point that Mayor Yu and Councilmember Sawyer pointed out, there are a number of benefits that have been described for project labor agreements. And we use the term potential because I think a lot of this depends upon the specifics of the agency, the specifics of the location, and some of the challenges or community-oriented demographic that you may see in those particular areas. So there are 4 that I've pulled out. These are things that I've researched or that we as a team have researched online. So this isn't necessarily my language. This is language used from various studies that are out there that promote the value of project labor agreements. So long-term project stability, union conflict resolution, the idea that these promote and produce increased inclusion, diversity, and safety within the workforce. And it does identify an enhanced training and advancement program for employees or for labor workforce that's working their way through the apprenticeship and journeyman programs. Next slide. On the other side, there are other organizations that believe that there are negatives associated with PLAs. Again, these are potential negatives, and it all similar to the benefits. It all depends upon the specifics of that community, including demographics, location, and contract types. But there is some clarity on the fact that there is a limited number of apprentice spaces that are open on an annual basis, depending upon the particular trade that's out there. Some trades, as we discussed with the North Bay Trades Council, are open and don't have limitations. Others have limitations. They do have a cost, and there is a timeline associated with that. Many of those apprentices are earning a wage during the course because they're learning on the job. But I think this is an area that we as a team only know a little bit about, and we would like to find out far more information about in particular the apprenticeship program. And I know the Trades Council is very willing to work with us. We just haven't had the time to be able to dig into this in more detail. And this could be an area that a policy could counteract, given certain aspects of our interest as an agency, should we choose to go the route of establishment policy. You'll also see yes, sir.
Can I ask you about number 2? Because I'll note, if you look back on your, I think 2 slides ago, I think it was Berkeley had information about paying prevailing wage, which Santa Rosa already does. If we're already paying prevailing wage, how would it increase the cost?
So again, Mayor, I'll just mention that these bullet points are this language that we've taken from other studies, not necessarily specific to our organization. You are right. There's generally not a huge discrepancy in the difference between paying prevailing wage and paying for union labor. With that said, we've heard mixed results in our conversations with other communities, some of which have stated that there is a higher cost of producing and doing business with the trades under a project labor agreement. Others have said they've seen nominal to no change in the cost, mostly because of the same thing that you just mentioned relating to prevailing wage.
All right, thanks, Jason. That's helpful.
The other thing is we are trying to understand the difference between project types. So, when we look at the different kinds of things, there might be considerations in project types or like who the lead agency would be, et cetera. So there are nuances within both the pros and the cons. And then back to apprenticeships, there are nuances even between the different organizations and how the apprenticeships work. So sometimes you're in, sometimes you're not. You have to wait 2 years. You don't get paid. You do get paid. So, it's trying to take a lot of information and sort of blanket it.
And I will say we didn't write these bullets. We cut and pasted from other studies, mostly because we didn't want to, as staff, show any leaning toward any of the negatives or any leaning towards any of the benefits.
No, I get it, and I appreciate it, Jason.
Yeah. And so you'll have you've had a chance to read through the rest of these. I won't go into more details on any of those bullets. Next slide. So this is an area that Bryce had brought up early on, is the question of what's local. What constitutes local for our discussion? What constitutes local? Should we be asked to develop a policy? Or if we choose not to develop a policy, is there a change in how we do our current business to better enhance the concept of local? And so we determined that there are 3 definitions, and those 3 definitions do come up. You already saw it on the slide that Raisa presented relating to the North Bay Trades Council that showed 3 different areas that they identified as local. One of which is looking at labor whose home address is currently within the city limits. That is one definition if we wanted to define local. The next would be expanding the term local to say, well, let's say that we need to draw from a larger area, and local is Sonoma, Marin, Napa, and Mendocino counties. Those counties that even in our local, what we would consider our local contractor base, those are the predominant counties that they're drawing employees from, with most being out of Sonoma County. And then the third really relates to organizations that may not be specifically located within our county itself. And those are where the addresses are within the jurisdictional boundaries of participating organization. And we say trade organization. Based on the slide that we received from the North Bay Trades Council, there are a number of offices that are located in other parts of the Bay Area. Those offices have members that exist and reside within Sonoma County, as well as the 5 counties that we identified under definition 2, but they also have a large number of members that are outside of our local area. And depending upon how they get assigned, and we'll discuss that here in just a minute, the trade, the union hall might assign somebody that they identify as local that is outside of our considered local area. And so what the staff is recommending is that when we use the term local, that local for us fits under the definition number 2. And that is when we try to determine what local means for us, that we use that definition as the standard basis. Again, part of the reason we're presenting this is we're looking for feedback from the subcommittee. And if you have a different definition of local that you would like to see us utilize, then we'll work toward basing our presentation to the full council off of that definition. But we want to at least present you with the 3 that we've been looking at and which one we recommend at this point in time. Next slide, please. And so if we got this right, after we talked with the North Bay Trades Council, it looks like when they receive a request for members out of their particular trade to fill a project under a project labor agreement, their first goal is to assign members that are within that definition of local. So, for example, if we were to say the city of Santa Rosa or Sonoma County, we could, within the concept of the document, identify specific zip codes, identify census tracts, identify particular demographics within it that would then be the first tier of evaluation for that particular trade to assign members to work under that particular contract. If they've exhausted that particular definition of local, they will move to the next tier of local, which, as they explained, would be an agreed upon regional look, which might include, as we talked about local, being Sonoma, Marin, Napa, Mendocino County. if there are not enough members to comply with the conditions of the project labor agreement policy within those two, then they will look to their statewide membership and fill in the member gaps along that way. Again, this was a single conversation we've had at this point. It's our intent to have additional conversations to refine this. And hopefully, if we've misstated this in any way, they'll reconcile that when they speak during open session or during open comment. But this was our understanding of how they assign members if they are asked or required to under a defined term of a contract. Next slide. So the next piece that we wanted to just clarify with the subcommittee is the definition of project. We are looking at public infrastructure projects as our primary focus for this particular discussion. I've outlined 6 specific categories that I think are ways for us to break out. And the reason I'm doing this is because there could be discussion moving forward. Should council ask for, or a subcommittee ask for us to have specific focus in the delivery of project labor agreements or of particular aspects of the project labor agreement, staff believes that these are categories where we could speak to in more depth and more detail and make specific adjustments within these types of categories. And it's just a way for us to provide more granular discussion should that be asked of the subcommittee and the council. And so these will be the 6. If there are things that may be missing, we'd certainly look to hear back from you, or if you have questions about why we've organized these in this way, we would love to hear your feedback.
John?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm curious, I don't see any reference to this in this slide or the prior slide about earth moving. I mean, I think it's OE3 that does, I mean, I think that's, I'm just curious why it's not included.
And so earth moving would be in 1 or 2 of these projects, either roadway, depending upon the type of construction of that roadway, and in the park landscape and environmental component, where we would be looking at those.
Okay.
We are aware that earth movement as a particular project component is something that the trades are interested in, and it just depends on how that fits relationally to the projects that are being released. And if you'd like, we can certainly add earthwork as a separate category.
Well, it may be obvious, but I noticed it as being like, it just wasn't mentioned, so that's why I asked.
I appreciate that feedback.
Thank you.
All right, next slide. So one of the tools that other agencies have used over the course of time to ensure that there is a specific percentage of the workforce assigned to a project is the concept of a community workforce agreement. And some agencies use different names and titles. And I don't want to get stuck on that particular title as being the only thing. It's the concept, it's the programmatic component that exists within that I want us to really contemplate. And we'll be looking for feedback from council for a couple of different reasons. One is, under the concept of a project labor agreement, this is a mechanism that we could, and based on the subcommittee's recommendation, would want to use to create a defined and definitive way of ensuring local workforce under our definition of local for every project that would be implemented under that policy. And these are just 2 examples, City of Los Angeles and Port of Oakland, and there are many, many, many examples. This is actually a very common procedure. One of the questions that we've started to ask is to whether or not this type of contractual arrangement could be incorporated within our existing contracts for construction projects. Do we have to, is this only to be used under a project labor agreement, or could we utilize the same concept and incorporate it into our existing infrastructure project contracts, requiring that, as you saw, 75% of our current contractors are out of the county, but why couldn't we require that they use a local workforce, whether it's union or non-union? So we've been working with the attorney's office. They're still researching whether or not that's a possible option. We don't have any answers for you at this point in time, but it's our intention to have that as part of the discussion as we go back into council in July, just so that we can see if this is the goal, there may be other options other than a project labor agreement to achieve that goal. And what might that look like? Next slide, and I'll turn it back over to Raisa to close us up.
Yeah, so that's the end of our presentation. You know, again, our interest as staff is to get as quickly as possible to the full council so we can discuss this there in a study session. But the feedback from this and of course the previous conversations will inform what that study session looks like. So the time between now and July when we hope to go there will be spent honing in on the presentation report, but also on continuing our outreach and data mining. So we have started conversations beyond labor and with our current contractors and building associations to also reach out to our chambers of commerce, so not just the one, but the many, as well as other business organizations. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking. We can take the slide deck down and begin the general conversation.
Mayor, if I might, I do have a question about the framing of it. Do you mind?
Yep, go ahead, jump in.
Raisa, could you talk, or Jason, could you talk about the any specific points that you would like to have us weigh in on beyond our general comments?
Go ahead, Raisa.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you know, generally what, you know, the key areas of discussion for us has been, you know, threshold, definition of local, like what are the levers that will, are the key pieces that would make up a PLA or a community workforce agreement. And those tend to be like, what is local? It's those last slides. What is local? What is included? What projects are included? Like, do we need to have parks in there? Do we need, is it really linear? Is it vertical? I think those are the two terms. So those key areas. That was a long, let me just be short, types of projects, definition of local, interests. Are we heading in a range of threshold? And I think that's it. And I think the other thing that's key, though, to Jason's last point on a community workforce agreement, can we do this without a PLA? Can we insert PLA types of things into our policies, or do we need to have a full-blown PLA and call it that? And I think the mayor mentioned that in the beginning.
And I do have a clarifying question. You mentioned that sometimes the cost for project labor agreements come in over the non-PLA projects. I'm wondering, in our jurisdiction, I suppose we don't have any information on that because the county hasn't actually used one. Do we know if that disparity has to do with the prevailing wage violations that we hear about?
You know, council member, I think this is one of the areas that we've been trying to gain feedback on. I can't say we've heard any definitive reasoning why the costs are substantially higher in some instances, but it's also not a uniform piece of feedback. And I'll encourage either Mike or Lori, who've been talking to those agencies specifically, to chime in if they feel like they've got something to add on what they've heard from agencies.
Okay.
I heard agencies discuss the fact that less competition has resulted in higher costs, but they weren't really specific.
I haven't heard anything definitive, although I've heard from contractors, and there was a recent editorial that I'm happy to share with folks that came nationwide about the cost increases that are likely seen implementing PLAs, and these are from contractors. It's upward of 18 to 20% is the number that I've read and heard, and I'm happy to bring back additional information if the council wishes.
And it's an
I
editorial.
think, yeah, I think it'd be helpful to also, if you're going to share editorials, to share who it's from.
Right.
What
That
I've
was
talked
where
to
I'm going.
Raisa, and yeah, what I've talked to Jason and Raisa a lot about is let's do actual academic studies because there is a lot of bluster, I think, around this conversation, both directions.
And typically the newspapers are owned by much more conservative, large corporate interests, and they write whatever they want in those papers.
Yeah, we definitely know that. And we know that from other large policy discussions. So we're looking, I mean, even when we looked at minimum wage, Berkeley was called into question over Irvine. So we're trying to find information from both sides.
Right. And I think like Fresno has one. Yeah, what I'm interested in is the thing is that, and we've brought this up before, is having the honest discussion about it. Because you'll find that if you're in favor of PLAs, there's a lot of solid information. And if you're against them, there's a lot of editorials. So let's see if, like the mayor said, we can get down to the realities on the ground.
And to be fair, they seem both to be editorials on all sides.
Exactly.
So the word can be used both ways. So we're trying to localize it, and it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'll add one more thing. One of the pieces that we're looking at is the economics of our local workforce. And so we're taking some of the zip code information and we're trying to overlay the data with our disparate communities. And Socorro's been very helpful in trying to pull that information together to learn, where are these employees coming from? And I think, it may or may not demonstrate anything of interest for us because we haven't actually seen the data, but we think that we need to go to that level of depth to try to help understand which employees, which local workforce is being impacted or benefited by this particular potential action. And so, Socorro, I don't know if you have a comment on the equity piece that we're trying to throw a lens over.
And Jessica also has a comment as well. So, Socorro.
We're just trying to combine all of the research we've been doing as a city. So looking at our equity priority communities and taking the data that Jason and Raisa have gotten, and Mike, from where our employees, the subcontractors and their employees actually are coming from, and if they are in our equity priority communities, and kind of using that data to guide these discussions so that we all are concentrated on the key concepts you brought up early on about kind of local workforce development and economic recovery across the community. Jessica?
Just one quick note I wanted to make is I think the key areas where we've been looking for feedback in terms of the definition of local labor, project type, threshold. I think that what's nice is there's a lot of flexibility here in how we design a PLA type of program. And when you think about costs more generally, you're essentially kind of creating a new overlay on top of your construction program that is distinct from prevailing wage, which is largely tracked kind of by contractors. They're comfortable with it. They use it. This will be new. And so, which is not to say that it is bad, but I think that what you have to think about is how we're going to take some of these key policy layers or levers and then sort of layer them into an operational document that then will give some good predictability to contractors so that you get a lot of good bids coming in, more competition, lower prices. And then on the administrative side at the city, how do we monitor that? How do we take on that new workload? How do we get the program to work well? So I think that this committee is really well situated to provide kind of good feedback about those policy alternatives.
John, do you have any questions or?
No, I think I can just respond to the input that you're looking for. Let's do public comment first. Okay, that makes sense.
If that works for you.
Sure.
Victoria, do you have any other questions?
No, but to your point about public comment, for the folks out there, I would look to like to hear feedback around threshold, local definition, and the types of projects, so that when we do weigh in, we're able to at least have captured some of your input out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Raisa and Jason, there's one variable that seems to be missing from the conversation, and that's how long does labor have to respond? And so if there's a project that falls under this definition and we put out the call for local workforce, how long typically do cities give the union hall to be able to respond before we move on and utilize another contract or another employee from a contractor?
And that's a great question, Mayor. I think that's going to depend upon the delivery process. If we're looking at a very specific one project, then we're doing it as part of the bid process, and we're selecting based on not just cost, but the availability and ability to be able to comply with the terms of the PLA. If we're dealing with large scale or system-wide policy, we're going to be pre-negotiating those terms with the halls ahead of time and have an understanding as to what membership is available for us for particular project terms.
Yeah, and just to hit on that point, so like some of the specialty trades don't have people here. So like, does that alter how we do, or how we what kind of projects we include, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Let's go to public comment to hear on this. We'll start with Nicole, followed by John. If you are interested in providing comment, hit the raise hand feature, comment about this item. We'll be getting to the rental issue next. Start with Nicole.
Hi, Nicole, you have been allowed to unmute. If you would confirm your ability to see the timer and introduce yourself, please.
Please give me the opportunity to unmute, please.
Oh, we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, thank
Yes.
you very much. Good morning, Mayor and members of the Santa Rosa City Council and Economic Development Committee. Nicole Gehring with Associated Builders and Contractors, Northern California chapter. We're a Northern California-based trade association with an apprenticeship pool in several trades. And so we train our training for our members all throughout the Northern California and in Sonoma County area. So I had some comments and thoughts. You could consider a workforce development agreement where you could put some of these terms in instead of a project labor agreement. That way, I'm most concerned with how your local contracting community is going to be able to still work and participate, even if it is that 28% on that slide, because that the general workforce that lives in Sonoma County, how are they going to be included? If generally under the project labor agreement terms, you're not, the reason why you don't see sometimes contractors bidding is because they can't work with their workforce, and that's their trusted people, and that's their how they deliver a quality professional job to you. And if they're not able to use their workforce, I mean, that's their secret sauce, then they can't deliver a good project for your city. And so I want to make sure that they're included. And so I want to make sure that all the construction professionals living in Santa Rosa and or Sonoma County that do this work, and that includes apprentices from programs such as ours, are also included, because they are the ones that want to build their community. Other people from other areas don't want to come in and build there. Those are the people that want to build their community. And another thing to think about for your general contractors that are located in Santa Rosa, a lot of them that are not the large Swinnertons or the Turners, the ones that are based in your community, check with them to see how much they can bond for. So if they can bond for $10 million or $15 million, you may, and they are the ones that build fire stations, police stations, community centers, you may want to rethink your threshold, because you want them to be able to build your community. So that's my thought on the threshold. And or also on your threshold, since you had some terms there on project types, maybe you do thresholds per trade. Maybe your $5 million is per trade, per electrical, per mechanical, for example. You do have a large linear construction contractor who is a mixed, who is part union and part non-union based in your area that does water treatment plants, and they want to be able to use their workforce and utilize. They have a special niche. So I would leave that comment there. In regards to costs, the Burbank project with the PLA at Santa Rosa City College, right out the gate, that was an extra $5 million more that it didn't need to be. It was a prevailing wage job. Santa Clara Valley Water District just bid a job. It was the lowest bidder was $1 million higher than the bid. So there are some discrepancies going on. Thank you for your time. I just love to be part of your study session and part of these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. We'll go to John.
Mr. Medina, I have unmuted you. If you would please confirm your ability to see the timer and introduce yourself.
I see that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council, mayor. This is John Medina. I'm representing the building trades. I'm wearing my building trades hat today. I'm the president of the building trades in the North Bay. I'm also business agent for the sprinkler fitters. Today, I was able to get some new information. That information is from the DIR and the DAS, Department of Apprenticeship Standards. I sent an email to staff. I've been giving staff plenty of numbers and volume of things, and I've seen a lot of the reports come up. And so thank you, everybody. It was great talking to Raisa and Jason. I'm here for anybody's information as well going forward. So is Michael Allen, the new Secretary Treasurer. Some interesting notes about the apprenticeship. The apprenticeship is needed to hire. You need to have prevailing wage. On prevailing wage jobs, you need to have apprentices. Out of the unilateral programs that Nicole was just talking about, the ABC in general, they have 117 registered apprentices. To the Joint Committee's programs, we have 678, and this is in Sonoma County. Of those programs, they have 6. Crafts that make up apprentices: labor, plumbing, fire sprinkler, electrical, carpentry, and roofing. Half of those 117 are roofers, 64 apprentices. The other third, or if you want to say, electrical is 42. They have 3 laborers, 1 plumber, 5 sprinkler fitters, and 2 carpenters are currently involved as apprentices that are registered with the state of California. Those numbers I gave them, those you can get online. We have 678 apprentices registered. Also pay attention to numbers of graduations. That's basically proof they're not hiring in the local communities. We are, and we're trying to. We need to have more jobs, to have the ability to hire more, as I've talked to before. And with a lower threshold, we can do that. We've got it already with the school district that has a low threshold. All projects under the bond and on $500,000 for anything that's contracted. The county is considering changing that $10 million threshold. And as Mayor Fleming or Council Member Fleming said, we only have one project that's on slated to pay any due to the membership. I'm sorry, I'm trying to speed up here and I'm tripping over my words. But look, if we have the school, the county, and the city, it gives us more time and more apprentices and more volume to hire and to bring more people in from the programs. The Burbank overruns, the Santa Rosa Junior College, everybody knows that's due to the design flaws from a 100-year-old building and the things that were found that were not part of the first approved program. So anyways, I'm here for any questions, you guys. Take a look at the resources and the actual numbers and not from these editorials.
All right, thank you, John. Nicole, you've already had a bite at the apple on this topic, so I'll go to Michael, but feel free to send staff and committee members a follow-up email if you have more to add.
Michael, you have been given permission to speak. If you would confirm your ability to see the timer and introduce yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, hi. I'm Michael Allen, and I think if you know that I've been the new executive secretary for the Building and Trades Council for all of 11 days. So essentially, but I can tell you that I've been in this community for 45 years. Very honored to be the first Latino legislator from the North Bay to serve in the assembly, to be the head of the Labor Council for many years, and now to be working with the trades. I would just ask the council and the staff to work closely with us to develop the data you need, the empirical data, to basically show that this is really excellent public policy. I would like to deal with this on like a non-ideological level. I don't think it escapes anybody's notice that when the Democrats administration are in power, project labor agreements are very acceptable. When the other party, the Republican Party, is in power, suddenly project labor agreements are not such a good idea. I think that the academic data very clearly shows that these agreements are cost neutral. I think what you find with most overruns, one of the most notorious cost overruns with the city of Santa Rosa was the building of the pipeline to the geysers that was done non-union. You probably have the records of that, but that's a very good example of a project going over budget. Usually it's change orders, poor planning, poor communication, and essentially not well thought out projects that cause the cost overruns, not the choice of the labor. The labor agreements ensure labor peace. And for me, when I work with this council and all the electeds in this area, I just want to look through the lens of social equity. The trades are doing an incredible job of bringing in the disadvantaged communities for the first time as their ticket to the middle class. And the lower the threshold and the greater volume of doing work with skilled trade union labor, the more opportunities we're going to give to even further enhance and enlarge our apprenticeship programs that we have here locally. And our apprenticeships locally, and I'm talking about the 5 counties, including Solano, will do a wonder. I think you know I'm also chair of Conservation Action. From a greenhouse gas aspect, we don't want our workers traveling long distances out of county for other projects. We want them here locally. And so we can reduce greenhouse gases, also create a climate for careers here within the trades where we're keeping our young people in this county. As an older member of the community now, we need to keep our young people in-house, get them trained, give them living wages and working conditions where we make this a better community. So I thank you for your time and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm looking for other hands. Are there any other comments? We'll go to
Yes.
Maddie, followed by Eric.
And Maddie, if you would please confirm your ability to see the timer and introduce yourself if you so choose.
Yes, I can see the timer. And my name is Maddie Hirschfield. I'm the political director with the North Bay Labor Council. I just have a couple of things to add. In terms of overruns, the famous one that you hear quoted by those not approving of PLAs is the JC library project that did go over budget, but that was due to the fact that they found major damage in the roof that they weren't expecting to see. And that was also the year of the Tubbs fire. So there were a few other things going on. That is an anomaly. It doesn't usually happen with PLAs, that kind of overrun. I also just wanted to talk about the apprenticeship program and how important that is, that apprentices actually make money while they're being trained, and there's special outreach to underserved areas. They're also working to get women into non-traditional careers. So this is a win-win all around, and I thank you for looking at this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. We'll go to Eric.
Eric, if you would please confirm your ability to see the screen and introduce yourself if you so choose.
Yes, thank you. My name is Eric, and I'm a concerned citizen that lives in the greater Cherry Street neighborhood. So as I listen to the discussion, I see a lot of information presented and also an acknowledgement that the topic at hand is polemic and political. But what I don't see involved in the discussion is the guidance of a trained economist to be able to formulate the questions that are being asked in regard of pursuing PLAs. I think everybody at the table wants to see opportunity, especially for disadvantaged people that live in the county. but the information seems to suggest that the labor pool comes from a regional area. In fact, you'll probably see in the next discussion how significant housing workers that are traveling regionally to work in the short-term rental community is. And that is actually a very key part of visitorship. And as we complete our
Eric,
survey,
I'm going to ask you to keep your comments on this. We'll go to the next item when we get to the next item.
Okay, thank you. I'll join you then. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Do we have any other hands for the discussion on this item?
I see no additional hands raised at this time.
Okay, I'll go ahead and bring it back to the board.
And Mayor, really quickly, just a time check, because I know we have about 20 minutes. We could do, for the short-term rental thing, we can do the presentation and see if we can do a special meeting for the continuation of it, if that's workable, knowing your time constraints.
Yeah, let's finish this item and then let's discuss as a subcommittee.
Okay.
I'm guessing we're going to need to recess the meeting and come back, if not later today, later this week. But I think anybody who's here for the short-term rental item knows the urgency of it as well. So I don't want to push it off for another month.
Right.
But we'll come back and we'll talk about that.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so who wants to start? I will ask, there was an implied question in there, and perhaps we don't have the data, but one data point that would be helpful is to better understand the interplay of change orders within this as well. Do projects that come under a PLA or something similar have fewer change orders? And what is the overall final cost when all is said and done between a PLA and a non-PLA project? And so that'd be helpful for us to better understand as well.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just say that in the initial evaluation is that, change orders are change orders and will occur regardless of the labor type that's out there doing the work. Things that are project specific and related are going to be, so I know Lori and Mike, as they continue conversations with various agencies, are asking that question. So far, the commentary that's come back seems to be outside of a standard change order element, but they're going to be digging in more detail as we prepare for the next conversation with council members.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Jason. Let's go to Councilmember Sawyer.
Thanks, Mayor. I will be very brief. So according to the questions that you were asking for input on, I'll move to the thresholds. I will remain silent on the thresholds because I'm still I'm skeptical about the need of PLAs, and I don't understand what problem we're trying to solve. So putting a threshold on something I'm not necessarily convinced that we need is a little, it's not necessary. The definition of local, I agree with you on number 2. I think about Novato as being, it's right there. It's pretty darn local. And I would hate to eliminate a number of workers in basically in our immediate area, not just have it in Santa Rosa, not just have it Sonoma County, but I would want to broaden that to a larger radius. So I'm in favor of I agree with your definition of local number 2. I'm curious about the CWAs and but being able to find some of the pluses that a CWA can offer without moving entirely into a PLA. And I think those were the 3 questions you were looking for input on. I very much look forward to the next meeting, and I look forward to it being before the council. And I'm sure we'll get a large number of individuals and organizations weighing in, and then it'll be up to the council to decide what direction to move in. So I think that's it. Did I hit the requested topics, Raisa?
Did you have
Jessica?
Did you have any feedback on types of projects, John?
No. Not at this point.
Okay.
I couldn't weigh in on the types because again, I'm one of the skeptics. So at this point, once we were to move into making a decision, then that kind of opens the door to the type of projects that I think would be reasonable. So I'll stay silent on the types as well.
Okay.
But
And
I want to
just-
thank, I do want to do one thing is thank staff. This was a great introduction. I thought we would have 100 slides, and for your ability to bring it down to this number and offer a balanced presentation, good job. I mean, I think it was well done. Thank you.
And just to confirm, John, you're comfortable with moving this discussion out of the committee and into the study session
Yes.
before the full council?
Yeah,
Great.
it needs to. Yeah, it needs that kind of airing. Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Mayor. So the way that I'll be looking at this has to do with a couple of things. One is making sure that we develop our local workforce, avoid prevailing wage workarounds that I hear concerns around, and then also reduce greenhouse gas emissions by transit. So I'll start with the range of what I consider local. Is not a really simple one, but I would consider what you could reasonably drive to or take transit to get to a work site within about an hour. So however you want to, define that, little over, little under is fine, but certainly the North Bay, whether or not it's Solano County, you would include it or not. But so to me that makes sense on the radius from Santa Rosa or Sonoma County. And then I am fine with including all projects. I think that will help us to deliver. And then it's my understanding that non-union shops can bid on these project labor agreements. They don't have to use union shops, that they can work around that quite easily and compete, but that they do have to agree to the terms. So I'm fine with including all work, and then we'll find out as we go down the road whether or not we have enough competitive bids, and that'll give us more information. I think the $5 million limit is, or the $5 million threshold is, I think it's arbitrary, but I don't say that in a negative way. I just say it as in that, like, I get that you were putting this together, you looked at that the county had $10 million. It hasn't resulted in any actual contracts under their project labor agreements. Let's try something lower. I don't know if it's the right number. What I think is that when we do take this to the full council, we'll hear from folks who are more intimately acquainted with the industry and be able to give us their input. What I'd say is if I were making a decision today, I would probably accept $5 million. And I'd probably say, like, let's do a program that we use for 3 years, and let's revisit it in 3 years and see what percentage of our projects we've been able to capture and what the impact has been on cost overruns compared with similar project that we had done. Or I wouldn't actually do projects in our past. I would compared to projects in other jurisdictions, because the costs of both labor and materials have gone up so much that there's no real way to do a now versus then and get a reasonable snapshot. And then I talked about threshold, I talked about local workforce, talked about projects. I think I've covered it all.
All right. And you're good to send this to the study session?
Yeah, I think that John and I might agree on that one point, that the whole council needs to take a look at this. And I think that it'll have the added benefit of bringing out more of our community partners if it's agendized in front of the full council.
All right, great. Well, so my comments are going to be fairly consistent with what they were when we first introduced this. I'll start by saying that the $5 million threshold is not acceptable to me. And that's because it doesn't solve the problem. What I'm looking for in a policy is to use the purchasing power of the city to change the economics of the region by allowing companies that start here or that are located here to actually compete for and have those contracts. One of the key components of being able to do that is having a workforce that can deliver on the contract. When I hear 5 million, I agree with the council member that's relatively arbitrary, but that's why I asked the clarifying question from you, Jason, about what percentage of projects are we actually talking about. And when we talk about fewer than 10% of the city's projects, I don't care what the threshold is, if it's only going to result in under 10%, 1 in 10 projects falling within it for the businesses and for the workforce to be able to depend on it, that's not going to solve the problem. That's not going to allow businesses to start here and invest in their workforce here. So for me, that threshold definitely needs to come down. And I don't want to talk about it in terms of a dollar figure amount. I want to talk about it in terms of what percentage of the contracted projects that we're putting out there would fall under that definition. And then for me, going back to the question of how long does one of the labor shops have to be able to respond? If we have a project that's closer, call it $500,000, that falls within that range, and we say you have 24 hours to respond back and let us know if you have a worker who is skilled and trained and able to deliver this work. And if you do, you've got the job. If you don't, we move on and we get somebody else. I think that that's a more reasonable approach and actually solves that problem that I'm looking for. So I'm hoping that that'll come down and we can talk about that a little bit more. In terms of a definition of local, I understand that practically it's going to be damn near impossible for us to have everybody come from Santa Rosa. And so definition 2 definitely seems reasonable to me. I would question or ask why Lake County wasn't included in that, just because Mendocino and Napa County having to do that drive all the time. There are definitely parts of Mendocino County that are further away than parts of Lake County. And so I would just ask, perhaps when we look at this again, perhaps we include Lake County. I'd actually rather use Lake County, have Lake County in it than Solano County. But I do understand that that's where a large chunk of our workforce comes from, just because in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, time of travel, and quality of life, particularly during commute hours, it is certainly hard to get to Solano County and back. In terms of types of projects, again, I just want to look at which categories do we have enough projects to sustain the development of our workforce and the creation of companies here locally that can rely on it. And so I don't have a good answer for you on that one. And then yes, let's kick this to the study session. Let's get input from the rest of the council members. I definitely think that there's going to be some sausage making, and I just want to thank staff for hitting the target as we're moving it on you. I really appreciate that. Councilmember Fleming, did you have something to add?
Yeah, to your point around $5 million only hitting a certain percentage of projects, I think there's a couple of points in there that would be helpful when it comes to the full council. One would be like at the different levels, like whether it's in $500,000 increments, if you could show us what percentage of projects would be swept up in that. And then also, if you could show us not just the percentage of projects, but the percentage of dollars expended on projects. Because if it's only a few percentage of our projects, but it's like 90% of the dollars, when he starts to get above a certain amount, that would be helpful for us to know. And then also, I think there's this underlying piece, which is that it can potentially be more work for staff to manage these contracts. If you could come forward and let us know what if we implement this, what resources may or may not be needed to execute this and what the costs associated with that are, so we can just have a fully informed discussion about going forward if that's the will of the council.
I appreciate that. I did also want to note, Nicole made a comment that struck me as well. She asked about developing a different threshold per trade. And so it might even be interesting to look at if you set a percentage of projects that you want to fall under this agreement, and I'm making this up, say it's 50%, the dollar figure might be different among different departments or different categories, but would still achieve that overall goal. And so that might be interesting for us to look at as well. Not that I know you all are not a research institution and we've just thrown entire theses at you, but more data is definitely helpful as we try to craft something that is smart and fits for our local community. And I think that that's one of the challenges that we have is some of our usual comparable cities, it's just not comparable in this one. They don't have the policy, they don't have some of the surrounding issues that we have. So But I do want to thank staff for it. We will go ahead and move on from the item. You do have 3 votes to send this to the study session. I believe the date was July 12th. And so I definitely look forward to that. And I will say, we've heard from some folks, we did see some hands pop up late in public comment. Reach out to me, reach out to the subcommittee members. I know we're all willing to sit down and talk to anybody about this and hear data that people can present. And so feel free to reach out and not just worry about being in the subcommittee. We'll talk to anyone on it. So thank you, staff. Now, subcommittee members, we do have the big item around short-term rentals. We do, obviously, Councilmember Sawyer, you said you probably need to leave in 6 minutes to be able to get to City Hall in time for budget today. Is there a time this week that would work for the 2 of you that perhaps we can recess this meeting and then re-adjourn and hear that item? That way, there's some certainty for folks who are very invested in this, who want to see the policy amended, that they get to be heard this week as well.
Or Mayor, if I may, another consideration might be next Tuesday so that we have enough time to notice and prepare other staff. We have to have code enforcement, planning, economic development, finance, a number of people. But then also importantly, there is a lot of public interest in this and we want enough time to let them know of the new date. So next Tuesday looks also to be an option as well. So I just want to throw that out.
And
I think if we did next Tuesday, we'd have to start at 9 o'clock because John and I have an ad hoc that starts at 11:30, and I wouldn't want to run into the same problem.
Okay, so we will work with staff regardless of which date that you choose to make sure that we have representatives from all areas.
Yeah, Victoria, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say this week is really busy. I've got enough budgets and MTC all week. So if we could do next Tuesday, I'm flexible on the time, whatever works for you and John and staff.
John, does that work for you?
Yeah, but I would need that. You're right about the ad hoc meeting at 11:30. So if we could start at 9, that would be, it would work. I think that would work for me next Tuesday.
All right, so what I'm going to do for folks in the public, we will set a special meeting next Tuesday at 9 o'clock. What I will also do is just hear public comment on that item for now, to take notes for myself and for staff and for folks who have been sitting through the previous discussion and want to be heard. John, I know you've got to jump off. Victoria, you also, because there's no decisions to be made, if you'd like to jump off, you're also welcome to. But I do want to make sure that folks
comments.
Okay.
I'd like to hear what people have to say.
Okay, John, we'll see you at City Hall at 12, and we will do a special meeting with that one item for next Tuesday at 9 o'clock. And then let's go to public comment on the item before we adjourn today's meeting as well.
We're just currently waiting for any individuals to raise their hand. Oh, there we go.
Let's start with Dan.
And just one moment, Dan.
Yes, hello.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, hi. Yes, hello, this is Dan Gudino. I am a certified vacation rental manager with Wine Country Getaway, and I'm also the president of the Santa Rosa Short-Term Rental Association. There have been several issues with the initial proposal and the final enactment of the Short-Term Rental Urgency Ordinance. One major issue is in drafting the urgency ordinance is that there was absolutely no feedback considered from hosts and operators like myself to help address the city's and the neighborhood's concerns. There are plenty of solutions in the short-term rental industry to address issues like noise, parking, trash, and parties at vacation rental properties. Proper operation of these homes requires homeowners and hosted managers to set up systems to preempt the aforementioned issues. For one, hosts should reinforce the message to guests that no parties or events are allowed in their property. A rental contract with legal recourse is highly advisable as another preemptive measure should guests decide to break the house visiting rules. Another deterrent is requiring a security deposit where hosts can collect if any violations occur. Exterior security cameras give homeowners and operators a convenient tool to monitor potential parties from breaking off. Finally, a high-tech solution is to install noise decibel meters inside and outside the home. These noise sensors monitor only the intensity of sound and not any intelligible conversations, therefore protecting the guest's privacy. Noise alarm thresholds are customizable by the decibel level and the time of day via settings in a smartphone app. Should any violations occur, the homeowner is notified and the guests receive an automatic text message reminding them about quiet hours. These are just some of the examples of what responsible homeowners and operators can implement in their homes to keep neighbors happy. Implementing some of these recommendations should eliminate the need to use city resources such as police. Please join the Facebook group, Santa Rosa, California Short-Term Rental Association. This Facebook group is open to all, and it aims to educate the public and short-term rental operators on best hosting practices, and as a complaint origination point and solution space to help address neighborhood concerns. I also want to extend my offer to the City Council and the Economic Planning Committee as a short-term rental industry expert in providing recommendations in the drafting of the final ordinance. I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Dan. We'll go to Gary.
And Mr. Lentz, if you would confirm your ability to see the timer, you have been granted permission to speak.
Unmute myself. Thank you. I can see.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I do definitely think that the approach to this issue could be handled in a more collaborative way. I feel like 98% of the short-term rental owners like myself want a solution that weeds out the bad actors. And unfortunately, I think the emergency ordinance has a lot of flaws in it, in that it sets up arbitrary limits that invite acrimony between homeowners and their neighbors, rather than creative solutions to get rid of the problem, which is the people who don't want to follow the rules. For instance, just today, I got something from the city saying that one of my neighbors has complained that it looked like there were more than 10 people at my home, I guess this past weekend. And I actually had complaints from the people that there were neighbors peeking over the fence and knocking on the door and trying to intrude on their time. So, I mean, we've set up an adversarial system here, unfortunately, that I don't think is going to solve the problem. And interesting, the prior speaker talking about high-tech solutions that might give us an actual way to enforce some of these things we're trying to deal with. Rather than having arbitrary limits on parking spaces and number of people in the house, let's attack the problem, which is, the noisy, the people that don't want to follow the rules, and especially the owners who don't care enough to follow the rules. So I hope that you guys will reach out to the STR community, because, like I say, the vast majority of us really want to help solve this problem so that, we can have a harmonious relationship with our neighbors, and this can cease to be an issue. Because the way the rule is set up now, it's really very difficult to enforce. The poor people at the city don't know what to do. I've talked to police officers. They don't want to get involved with it. There's no arbitrary way to solve this problem. But some of these high-tech solutions that the prior speaker mentioned, I think we have some ideas that really could help in the drafting of this ordinance. And we'd love to meet with city staff and or the council and this committee to talk about this. And I guess we'll do it next week at 9 a.m. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon, I hope.
All right, thanks, Gary. We'll go to Eric.
And Eric, if you would confirm your ability to see the timer and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. This is Eric Frazier with truthinTourism@gmail.com. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today, in all due respect, on a contentious issue. And I assume that this doesn't preempt our ability to also contribute our comments next Tuesday.
No, absolutely not. You're good.
It is a flexible situation. So to echo the concerns of the previous callers, is that we don't really understand why there was this urgent run up to this ordinance, and with a very costly enactment. It was like and I, as a researcher, and hopefully as a respected researcher, I think you recognize that I can smell bad fish. And so the data that was served up in the run up to this, not only was it not collaborative with the industry, but it had no basis. It had no factual basis. And what we see now as our research continues is that same sort of trend. Many owners don't realize that there's a complaint on their record. The complaint process is heavily flawed. The case studies that our professionals are seeing is incredible economic impact to the people that you are sort of sworn to protect, like our senior citizens. And so the whole thing has been a colossal screw up, quite frankly. And I think really the only way to reset is to be sure that we have firm fact finding, robust collaboration and dialogue. But we also need a commitment to a higher level, a higher professional standard in how we go about creating policy. This impacts way more than you know. And I don't understand how people were giving themselves permission to use information that they must have known was not correct. What type of working environment are you creating for your staff when logical people can look at information and say, look, this just doesn't add up. This doesn't match my experience. That isn't really the information that I'm exposed to. So there's a much broader issues at risk here. So next Tuesday, we'll be able to notify those that have received citations and didn't know about it. So they may also seek to participate. But thank you for the chance to talk today. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Eric. Do we have anybody else who'd like to comment on this item?
We have no additional, pardon me. Yes, we do. David Long.
Okay,
Mr.
go ahead,
Long.
David.
Hey, good morning, council members. We got 3 talkers that were speaking in a proactive sense about short-term rentals. So before we close, I just want to give you a little insight from the other side. Eric Fraser touts that there's no factual basis or that the urgency ordinance was rushed through, but I can tell you firsthand experience. I live in a neighborhood in the Northeast where there are, I don't want to say hundreds, but there are short-term rentals that now blanket the neighborhood. And back when the urgency ordinance was passed, there was just a countless number of homes in the 4 and 5 bedroom range that were hosting events that had, 20, 30, 50 people at them with cars parked on the streets. And so there is a basis for having some kind of control over what Dan Gudino actually refers to as a short-term rental industry. So I think we'll hear a lot of information from both sides, and we'll get some good change put into the ordinance that should be effective. And I want to thank you for taking up the issue. It's a contentious issue and it takes a lot of time on a lot of people's behalf, but I know that in the end we'll get there. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you, David. We've got Yvonne.
And Yvonne, if you would confirm your ability to see the timer and introduce yourself, please.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk this morning. My name is Yvonne Rosa Scott. I have a hosted unit. My comment is very short and to the point. The charges right now that we have for the permit are way too high, over $1,000. Would like it to be considered to lower this amount based, I don't know, maybe on square footage or maybe on the revenue that we're getting. But between the permit and the taxes that we're paying, the TOT taxes that we're paying, basically the income is very, very low. So I'm just asking for this to be considered. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, last call for hands. Do we have anybody else?
I see no additional hands raised at this time. Oh,
we
pardon
had-
me. We just, we had an individual, but they lowered their hand.
Okay, I'll bring it back then.
Pardon me. Patrick
All right,
has.
Patrick, last chance. Keep your hand up, give your comment. You'll be our last speaker for the day.
And Patrick, you have been given permission to speak. Patrick?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. We have a nuisance problem, and we should have a public policy about what is a nuisance and the proper way to mitigate the nuisance. We have a parking policy, and it should be a public policy that's understood, and it should be broad, and everybody should understand it and obey it. Noise nuisance, etc. We shouldn't be pitting any segment of our community against another segment of the community if we can avoid it. I'll stop and maybe have more to say next Tuesday.
All right, thank you, Patrick. With that, I'll bring it back. As we mentioned, and I appreciate everybody's patience with this, we've got a couple of meaty topics here in the Economic Development Subcommittee. We'll come back next Tuesday at 9 a.m. And we'll have only this item on the agenda for economic development. And so we'll be able to focus in on it. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you for the data that you all keep sending. Feel free to keep doing it and keep reaching out. And with that, Raisa, we'll go ahead and adjourn today. And council member, I'll see you in about 20 minutes for our budget meeting. Thanks, everyone.